Today, stocks post their best month in decades. Plus, Apple reports quarterly earnings. We'll tell you why Wall Street always waits with bated breath for these numbers. And a deep dive into the latest on how big tech is helping public health officials trace the coronavirus. I'm Mackenzie Sagalos, and this is CNBC After Hours, Work From Home edition. Let's take a look at the scoreboard. Stocks fell across the major indexes on this final trading day of the month. But despite today's losses, April was a very good month for the stock market. It was the Dow's best month since 2002 and the S&P 500's best month since 1987. And it was a busy afternoon of earnings reports from some of the biggest names in tech. Now, Amazon has been a huge winner during this pandemic, but shares dropped in after-hours trading once the company posted a smaller profit than analysts were expecting. But here's the one thing everyone's talking about. CEO Jeff Bezos put out a statement saying Amazon will make about $4 billion in profit between April and June, and the company will spend all of it on coronavirus-related expenses. And then there's Apple. The company warned investors back in February that their business would take a hit from coronavirus. And today, Apple reported slowing revenue growth and declining iPhone sales from the same quarter last year. The company declined to offer an estimate for next quarter's earnings, citing too much uncertainty surrounding the outbreak. Experts told CNBC that these results are pretty good and could have been a lot worse. Now, these numbers are important. Analysts and investors always watch corporate earnings closely for insight into the business environment. But Apple is different, and in a way, more important. Apple is so big that its performance can affect the broader stock market. CNBC's Dominic Chu can break it down.
Apple is one of the most important companies in the world and one of the most critical stocks in the entire market. Now, the reason is simple. It's worth a ton of money. The headline here is that Apple is the second biggest company out there as measured by market value. It's now worth around $1.27 trillion. Now, the only company worth more currently is Microsoft, which is worth around $1.34 trillion. Stock indices like the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100 give more weight to companies worth more in value. In the S&P 500, Apple makes up nearly 5% of the overall index. And it gets even more important with the NASDAQ 100, where it makes up a whopping 11% of the index. Apple is now probably the biggest part of the Dow Jones Industrial Average as well. It's worth about an 8% weighting there. So Apple, one of the most critical stocks for the entire stock market.
All right, and now for three of today's biggest developments in the global coronavirus pandemic. First, good news on a possible COVID-19 drug. Yesterday, we got promising data from a clinical trial of a potential antiviral treatment called remdesivir. Also, White House Health Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci said the drug performed well in a separate trial run by the federal government. Now, in that trial, it helped speed up the recovery time for infected patients. And today, Gilead CEO said in an open letter that the company has 1.5 million doses of the drug in supply, which is good for 140,000 individual 10-day treatments. He also vowed to expand the drug's production capacity around the world. And second, everyone's favorite conference call controversy-causing CEO strikes again. Tesla CEO Elon Musk dropped an F-bomb and called lockdown measures fascist on last night's earnings call.
What the excuse me. People, the outrage, it's an outrage.
The rant comes after a fight between Tesla and Alameda County in California. Now, when the shelter-in-place orders first came, the company said its Fremont factory would remain open and keep producing electric cars. However, the county eventually ruled that Tesla's business was not essential, and operations at the factory remained halted. Now, we should point out that Tesla had a really good quarter and actually turned a profit when most analysts were expecting the company to lose money. But that fact is getting slightly overshadowed by Musk's outrage. And finally, NBA players, agents, and team executives are calling on the league to cancel the rest of the season. The NBA first suspended the season in March, but this week, players were allowed to return to practice facilities. Now, there are billions of dollars on the line here. In total, the teams receive about $2 billion from TV broadcasters ESPN and Turner Sports. The teams can make even more money from deals with regional networks. But execs from the teams are worried about liability issues if games resume. They also told CNBC they are frustrated with the lack of information coming from the commissioner's office. For its part, the league is still working on plans to resume the season. We should also note that LeBron James tweeted that calls to cancel the season are, quote, absolutely not true. He also said that he and the Lakers are ready to play as soon as it's safe. Okay, let's get to our sound check. Here's a roundup of the day's biggest action and what the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say on CNBC's airwaves today.
For me, it's a little bit too fast, too soon, but I'm hoping that things will go well. In the absence of widespread, robust, ubiquitous testing, no one really knows to what degree this virus is existing within our communities.
I think the bigger risk right now is we reopen while we still have a lot of smoldering infection, and so we never quite get rid of it. It just continues to smolder all through the summer, and then we face combustion in the fall.
It looks like some of these companies were basically created for this moment. If you didn't know, the Microsoft quarter was just a thing of beauty. Facebook quarter was good, and then boom, they said that April is stabilization, one of the themes that we're seeing in tech. Or you have ServiceNow. They had an unbelievable quarter, maybe the best in the history of the company. This was the best night for corporate earnings since the season began.
People are obviously not only buying our products in much greater rates, but they're also consuming them. And we're also seeing consumption increase in different occasions. And so one of the number one occasions that cereal is actually growing in is cereal for dinner. And so it's growing at breakfast at double digits, but it's growing as a dinner replacement as well.
And now let's dig into the next step America is taking in this crisis, reopening. The federal government's social distancing rules expire today, and President Trump said he will not extend them. And by tomorrow, more than half of the states in the U.S. will have started to reopen. Take a look at this map. All the red states are shut down, but every other state has either already reopened some businesses or will begin to open up tomorrow. We've been hearing from doctors, scientists, and business leaders for weeks now that extensive testing is essential to safely reopening the economy, along with contact tracing, the process of identifying all the people a COVID-positive patient may have come in contact with since contracting the disease themselves. Now, it's hugely important as people start leaving their homes and going back to work and resuming other aspects of normal life, like shopping. Today, Macy's said it will reopen 68 of its department stores beginning on Monday. This announcement comes a few days after Simon Property Group, a real estate company that owns the most shopping malls in the country, said it will reopen 49 of its malls and outlets over this coming weekend. Tracing the daily contacts of millions of people on the move is a massive undertaking for the U.S. So massive that the country's two biggest tech rivals, Apple and Google, joined forces to tackle the effort by using Bluetooth data from smartphones. Billionaire former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg is also working on developing contact tracing apps for hard-hit New York State. Tomorrow, Apple and Google will start to roll out these toolkits for developers. CNBC.com reporter Christina Farr has been working her sources at both companies to get the latest details.
Apple and Google, two tech companies locked in a battle for literally years on who can sell more devices. These companies are rivals in every sense of the word. But, back in early April, you saw these two companies decide to work together on something called contact tracing. And what that really means is that they are going to use the smartphone, which can track our location and who we're meeting with, to assist public health departments in figuring out what the potential exposure is to the virus by tracking whether people have been in close contact with each other. So you can also harness Bluetooth to be able to tell whether I've been in less than 6 feet of contact with someone else. And we can do that with a very sophisticated system of, codes and sort of randomly generated keys to track this all the time, but then ensure that the information is not stored on a centralized server, it's on the phone, and that it could not be used by governments for a system of very intrusive surveillance. So the information about the individual is not going to be shared with anybody except for public health. So Apple and Google are not developing an app, and that's really important. What they are developing is an API, or application programming interface, and that is a piece of software that developers can build on top of. The idea is that this will specifically be for developers working with public health and not just those who are building apps for their corporations or for governments for any other purpose. And it is, of course, going to be opt-in. We're expecting the API to be released tomorrow. And what that means is that public health departments and the apps that are working with them will be able to tap into it to create contact tracing apps. So, you may find that suddenly you start to see a bunch of marketing and outreach that encourages you to participate in something like this, especially once economies start to reopen.
All right, we'll leave you with a numbers round. Since Amazon stock has been outperforming during this pandemic, today, as the company reports its first quarter earnings, we're diving into Jeff Bezos's billions. Let's kick it off with $140 billion. The Amazon boss is now worth $140 billion. Bezos is one of the few billionaires to see his wealth increase in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. Next, $40 billion. Bezos' net worth has risen by $40 billion since the stock market hit its lowest level in the midst of the pandemic turmoil on March 23rd. Now, Amazon stock has surged more than 30% since then, as millions turn to the e-commerce giant to get goods delivered to their homes as they're quarantined. And finally, 2. Amazon stock market dominance has made Jeff Bezos 2 times richer than Facebook chief Mark Zuckerberg. Zuck is worth $70 billion, and as we just mentioned, Bezos is worth $140 billion. That's it for After Hours. Stay up to date in real time with CNBC. Get the latest on the earnings numbers coming out of giants like Apple and Amazon, and catch every development in this historic battle against coronavirus and the unprecedented economic fallout by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. We'll be right here in our home offices every Tuesday and Thursday with a new edition of After Hours. Be sure to catch us then. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next week.